Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of White House Chronicle, which is coming right up. But first, a few thoughts of my own. I know the exact time, the exact place, everything about when I became old. It was at an Amtrak train station, and I was buying a ticket. The lady looked directly at me and said, "You qualify for the senior discount, don't you?" So I looked around to see who she was addressing these remarks to, and clearly it was me. I was the only person there. Then it came in a torrent. Doctor said to me, "Your knees aren't too bad for a man of your age." Oh, another one said, "We don't screen for that in a man of your age." And so it went. Day after day, doctor after doctor, situation after situation, the dread words for a man of your age. But I want to tell you, the final, ultimate insult was a dentist who said, "Well, you know, you could implants, but in a man of your age, is it worth it?" The answer is yes. For a man of my age, I have a lot to offer, and I have had it with that awful phrase and with senior everything. I just got a letter from somebody who said she's 94 years old, and she said she refuses to take the senior discount in the cinema lest she think that she is old. There you have it. Man of your age. What a horrible phrase. I will be back with the most extraordinary, interesting person who we're talking to about Europe. She is one of the gifted commentators here in Washington. You're going to love her, I know. We'll be right back.
White House Chronicle is produced in collaboration with WHUT, Howard University Television. And now, the program host, nationally syndicated columnist Llewellyn King, and co-host Linda Gasparello.
Hello again, and thank you for coming along. I'd like to remind you that guests for this show, and sometimes myself, we stay in Washington at the American Guest House. It's like a club, very cozy, very comfortable. Nominally it's a bed and breakfast, but it's much nicer than that. It is a very pleasant environment. It reminds me of a club I used to belong to in London, where you could just settle in. It has all the comfort of a familiar suit of clothes. Do look it up if you're coming to Washington. You'll find yourself extraordinarily well taken care of. Now I would like to introduce you to Annette Heuser, who is the Executive Director of the Bertelsmann Foundation here in Washington. She is our special guest today. Welcome to the broadcast. And of course our regular co-host of this program, Linda Gasparello. Welcome both. And tell us a little bit about the Bertelsmann Foundation. It's named for the publishing company, correctly?
Yeah, the Bertelsmann Foundation is operating here in town since 2008, when we opened our foundation here in the US. We are one of the biggest European think tanks, and we thought that it's very important for us, in order to strengthen our ties with US policymakers, to have a physical presence here. And we focus on all issues related to transatlantic affairs, the security relationship between Europe and the US, but also right now the economic ties between the Europeans and the Americans.
It's not just Germany at all, it's all of Europe.
No, all of Europe is important, even if some commentators here in town get the impression that Brussels and Europe is governed from Berlin.
Linda, do you have that impression?
Oh, certainly not.
Things were going along pretty nicely, and then we had the spying scandal. We have it. It's really upset the Europeans, hasn't it?
Yeah, the Europeans, and in particular the Germans, were quite irritated to find out that the NSA was spying on them for quite a while right now, and not only spying on a kind of regular basis, but also it seems that the NSA, the National Security Agency, was bugging the EU mission here in Washington, D.C., was bugging major German ministries, and most likely the Chancellery. And European policymakers, as well as the broader public in Germany, is questioning right now, are these really our friends in Washington, D.C. who are doing that on us? And the German public was quite irritated that the president stayed silent on the issue and didn't, you know, came out and said something that cleared the air, so to say.
Isn't it long been assumed that countries spy on each other, that they listen in to each other? We have had all kinds of security issues with the building and construction and location of embassies here in Washington, especially during the Cold War. We haven't heard so much since, but I'm sure that we have deep curiosity about, say, the Chinese embassy. So isn't this a little like in Casablanca where he said, I'm shocked to hear there's gambling going on here? Is it a bit like that?
You're right, but at the same time, Europeans, and in particular Germans, were irritated about the scope of the spying. Because we are asking ourselves in Germany right now the question, is it really proportionate to spy on German ministries or even to spy on other German leaders like the German Chancellor if we are talking about the fight against terrorism here? And we have to start a debate across the Atlantic. What are we really able to sacrifice when it comes to our personal freedoms in the fight against terrorism? And I think this is a debate that not only Germans or Europeans would like to have, but as we see right now, Americans are eager to have this debate as well.
Americans are pretty upset.
Yeah.
It's pretty upset.
And Annette, is the German public somewhat relieved that the U.S. Congress was trying to take action to curtail some of the NSA's spying on the public? Were they in line with what Congress was trying to do to make sure that if the NSA did something, they would have to do it by court order, which is actually not that hard to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there is some sort of relief right now on the German side that also the Americans start to question the actions of the NSA.
Right.
And also it's not only about the NSA in Germany, it's also about what we allowing our own intelligence services, the German intelligence service, to do on the German citizens. So, and I think it's a good start that we have right now a kind of high-level working group with Europeans and American officials who start this debate about what is proportionate in the fight against terrorism. What do we need to have to do together when it comes to surveillance, intelligence that we need to have in place, and we will see where this will lead us.
How might this filter into the trade negotiations that are going on? I know in trade rounds with Europe, privacy has been a big issue. Mm-hmm. Is this likely to come up again as we get into the trade negotiations for the big...
This just set the stage. You're quite right. This is the huge negotiation, the biggest thing that's coming up, which this is the Atlantic Free Trade area. If it comes off, it'll be the largest trading bloc in the world, and there'll be enormous benefits to both sides, jobs, free flow of trade, etc. So it's very unfortunate timing, isn't it? Is it going to hurt this negotiation?
Yeah, I think what you addressed, this free trade talks between Europe and the US, is the mega game in town between Europeans and Americans right now. We call it by its acronym TTIP, which stands for Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. Mm-hmm. And actually what it will create is the biggest and hopefully most competitive market in the world between the Europeans and Americans. And at the height of the NSA scandal in Europe, a lot of European politicians called for putting these TTIP trade negotiations on hold. But they were not successful with that because neither side can afford right now in this kind of still uncertain economic climate to lose out on trade talks. So the Americans, the White House, as well as the Europeans, in particular the German government, is very eager to get these talks on track right now. And so far we haven't seen that this is really impacting the talks in a negative way. Mm-hmm. But Linda, you are right. The entire issue of data protection is a kind of old story between Europeans and Americans, and it will come up. We are talking about something that we call the safe harbor provision here, which means that companies like Google or Facebook can transfer data across Europe without any oversight. Right. And this is, of course, something we need to get straight and need to put on the table and discuss between both sides.
Exactly.
It's interesting that Google should be an example because one of the criticisms that I receive a lot from individuals in this country is that increasingly we feel ostracized and without any authority because we can't ever get anybody on the phone. We have to talk to a computer, dial this, dial that. We've been digitized, we've become numbers. Sometimes I wonder if it matters if the NSA is listening to me, if I'm only a number. And the worst companies for this disenfranchisement or sense of disenfranchisement that the populace has are the big new computer companies, the AOLs, the mentioned Google, but also Amazon, etc., where the customer is a different creature from the customer of old, where there was a relationship, a personal relationship between a human being, the customer, and the human being, the company. Mm-hmm. Now there's this computer system and the customer. And so all of this is played into a great sense of uncomfortableness and sense that we don't count. And now we hear the government is listening to our most intimate secrets.
Sure.
And that's very disturbing. It's not just that it brings up visions of totalitarianism, it also brings up kind of visions of the government as a peeping Tom, as a disgusting entity, which is disturbing. Linda, you wrote at one time a great deal, and very well, if I might say so, about food in the food industry. It would seem that food is going to be one of the big issues when it comes to this trade negotiation, particularly genetically modified
organisms, the GMOs.
Right, exactly.
How do you think that can be resolved?
Could that be a deal breaker?
Just to set the stage, Europe is opposed, and we have accepted it. You know, and again, a big company that we feel rather remote from, with certain big brother characteristics in our sense of feeling, Monsanto is changing the nature of things.
Right. But where do we stand? Could that be a deal breaker? I mean, these negotiations are supposed to end up with a deal by the time President Obama leaves office, so that's 2 years from now. Could this cause the whole deal to collapse, or it's such a huge thing? I mean, agriculture is such a huge part of any deal.
At the same time, it's also an old issue that's around for a while between Europeans and Americans. And look, there are a number of stumbling blocks in this free trade agreement between Europeans and Americans, from data protection issues to financial market regulatory issues to public oversight issues, including the famous GMO, genetically modified organisms. We are talking about these famous chlorinated chicken issues that Europeans feel uncomfortable having genetically modified food in the European supermarkets. It's an issue about labeling. It goes beyond that. It's an issue about farming, where we have different cultures in Europe and the US, and this needs to be on the table. All these stumbling blocks you can address as a negative thing. I would see them as a positive thing, because you know, these are issues where we have to come to terms on both sides of the Atlantic if we are really serious being competitive in today's world. If the Europeans and Americans say, okay, we need to step up our game if we want to have a say in the 21st century when it comes to the global market, if we want to compete with countries like China, Brazil, or others in today's world, we, the Europeans and Americans, have to reach an agreement on these issues.
And this becomes really the first grand bargain of the 21st century, doesn't it, if it takes place?
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. But also don't forget, the Americans are not putting their eggs in one basket in today's world. They are also negotiating with Asia right now, the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is also a huge trade agreement that is paying tribute, if you will, to this kind of pivot to Asia that we see right now here in the US, not only investing in security terms in the Pacific, but also when it comes to the trade relationship with Asian partners.
I'm going to interrupt for a moment for station identification. For the benefit of our listeners on Sirius XM Radio, Channel 124, the POTUS channel, you're listening to White House Chronicle from Washington, D.C. with myself, Llewellyn King, Linda Gasparello, co-host of this program, and our distinguished guest, Annette Heuser of the Bertelsmann Foundation. She is the executive director and the founder of the Washington office. This program also can be heard around the world and seen on the English language stations of the Voice of America, as well as 200 public and PEG stations, television stations here in the U.S. Annette, where is Europe now? We were confused by the currency problems, the debt problem, and yet things are sort of struggling along. Is there a resolution in sight?
Mm-hmm. No doubt the euro crisis is far from being over, and actually the Europeans and their governments know what they need to do. We need to have the right structures in place, like the banking union, more transparency when it comes to the actions of the European Central Bank, for instance. But the thing is, when we are facing elections in Europe, and we are facing a major one in Germany right now, everything is on hold, like in America when you are facing your election cycle. So political decision makers try to play it a little bit safe when they have to ask their voters to cast their vote, and this is the case right now in Europe.
What are the great issues in the German election?
I mean, one of the major issues in Germany is, of course, during the election, what the solution is for the euro crisis and how much the German taxpayers are willing to pay for the next bailouts that are most likely to come up for the German taxpayers. And Angela Merkel, our German chancellor, is very conservative here, and she tries to create the impression that everything is under control. I would doubt that to a certain extent.
In American terms, we tend to look at everything as conservative or liberal. Is the result likely to be a more conservative or liberal administration in Berlin?
I mean, if nothing dramatic happens, most likely Angela Merkel will be the head of a center-right coalition again, governing with the liberals as a junior partner. And that would mean that also nothing dramatic will change regarding Berlin's course towards the European Union and the euro crisis. Everything will stay on track, and most likely our finance minister, Wolfgang Schäuble, who is among the veteran finance ministers in the world, will also stay in office. He has already indicated that he has no plans to leave.
How does the question of immigration figure into the elections in Germany? It's certainly a question that is important in countries like France and Spain, and now where we're even seeing
Italy and Britain.
Even where we're seeing a disturbing stories about the fact that immigrants that have come into Spain, Muslim immigrants from Syria, are now going out, leaving Spain and joining jihadi groups, and will, after whatever develops in Syria, come back to Europe with all of the war skills that they've learned, right, and use these in Europe.
I think there are two dimensions here when we talk about immigration in Europe. If you take a look at a country like Germany, our birth rates are very low, 1.2, 1.3. So when it comes to our immigration law, we have to become a little bit more competitive and aggressive here, attracting the high talent around the world, as well as people that work in our service industries. And we have all sorts of debates around that. When it comes to refugees coming from places like Syria right now or North Africa, that's a very serious security problem right now. And it tells the European citizens and their related governments again that you can't just put or stick your head in the sand and hope that these issues go away. If you are not addressing the issues of these very severe political transformation processes in North Africa and in the Middle East right now, these issues are coming to us. Exactly. They are knocking on our doors. So sooner or later, this is an issue that needs to be addressed in a more coherent way in the European Union.
I was talking to somebody very recently who said, well, why does everything seem to work in America? We were talking about trade unions. The trade unions are under political pressure. The raison d'etre is somewhat confused. In Germany, trade unions are part of the management of the companies. How is it that Germany has produced that model, and how does that model work?
Right.
That it doesn't work here? The other question related is, Why does the healthcare system cost less in Germany by half than it does in America?
Yeah, okay, when it comes to the German model of social market economy, it's one of our core beliefs that you have to integrate all the related partners, including the trade unions, fairly. And you know, I have worked for many years for a company that always has a union representative at the table. And I feel very comfortable as an employee to know that my interests are represented. And it doesn't mean that companies are less competitive if they have an equal representation of labor unions at the table. I would make the point quite the contrary, because they take care of the employees' needs and their interests. When it comes to the German healthcare system or the European model, how to set up a healthcare system, I think we have learned our lesson. We have a very competitive healthcare system that also has a public component, though those who can't afford a private healthcare insurance always have the option to have a public coverage, which is very important, in particular if you're a single mom working, don't have the salary to afford a private healthcare insurance. And I think that's something we are very proud of in Europe, in particular in Germany, but also the German taxpayers know that it comes with a price tag. We are all willing to make the sacrifices when it comes to our taxes, which are significantly higher in Europe overall than they are here in the US.
Well, I was just going to say that the tax stumbling block here is a formidable one. We simply will not raise the taxes to get the kind of benefits.
Which is a relatively recent.
And it is a relatively recent.
This absolute fear of tax. But I remember talking to a leading British conservative, and I said, well, are you going to push to cut taxes? This was before the recent days, it was about 15 years ago, and he said, why? This was a conservative. Well, every conservative in this country will tell you why to cut taxes, whether in fact that works or not, whether you pass the tipping point and create more trouble than you sought to alleviate. Germany, this industrial giant in Europe, why doesn't the rest of Europe learn from Germany? Why aren't the French copying Germany? Why are they going their own route? Why aren't the Italians sending people to Germany, say, send us industrial missionaries to tell us how to fix things?
That's a good question, but I think Germany also has learned recently that we can't export things that work in Germany, like we have a debt brake, for instance. We can only spend on the national and sub-regional level so much budgetary-wise. And we have introduced this kind of debt brake to other countries like Spain, for instance. But it's not really working because you're facing a different kind of public culture here. And we have to understand that not everything that works in Germany can be exported to other countries, in particular not other European countries, though these countries have to come up with their own solution how to manage the euro crisis right now.
Can I just talk a little bit about a relationship that I think is really interesting and one that's been developing for a while, but that is the relationship between Germany and Poland, which is growing closer and closer. And I wonder how what your opinion is about, where that's going. Some have been calling Poland the new Paris of, Warsaw, the new Paris of Europe in the relationship between Germany and Poland versus Germany and France.
Right. It's interesting to see right now that this German-Franco alliance that has been the kind of core alliance, the motor of European integration for decades right now, is slowing down. To a certain extent, the relationship between Berlin and Paris is eroding from the inside. There's also on the top level between German Chancellor Merkel and the French President Hollande not a really, really good sense of we know where to go with this European project, while the Chancellor looks more and more towards the east right now and sees that Poland has become a very, very trustworthy partner, a partner that is not only in security terms, very reliable within NATO, the North Atlantic Alliance, but also when it comes to the economic relationships in Europe. Poland has become a kind of mediator whenever a conflict appears in Europe. And I think Merkel right now is putting a lot of efforts into further deepening the relationship with Warsaw. She recently also made a pledge for increasing the civil society ties between Germany and Poland by setting up a German-Polish foundation. So these are all signals that Warsaw and Berlin are the new power axis.
I'm looking at that particularly in how that relationship might down the line be important in countries like Bulgaria, which are going through troubles right now. I mean, troubles like the Arab Spring, but this is a European country. This is Bulgaria. And yet there's, they're looking for a change in leadership and a change of direction. And, I would think that Germany and Poland would be able to be a very strong influence in whatever direction they take.
Right. And Poland in particular, as a country in the East, in Central and Eastern Europe, can serve as a role model for countries like Bulgaria, or think about Romania, who are struggling with the political process right now. And we have to understand, not only in Egypt, but also in these countries who are members of the European Union, it takes a long time to establish democracy. It's not revolution today and democracy tomorrow. The political transformation processes all these countries are undergoing right now are not linear. They all suffer from setbacks, and we have to give these countries the benefit of the doubt that they will come up with the best solutions for themselves.
In the last minute, I know that you feel very kindly towards America. Would you tell us what's right with America?
There are a lot of things right with America, and there is a reason why I want to stay here, because in comparison to Europe, I think you don't have these silos here in American society. In Europe, when you start your business career or whatever career, you start in academia, you start in economics, but here you are allowed to switch silos, you're allowed to experiment, you're allowed to fail, and people give you the benefit of the doubt to start again. And I think this is still what makes this country great, and this is still why I like to live here.
Annette Heuser, as a nationalized American, as an American citizen of the British persuasion, welcome to America. You can live here as far as Linda and I are concerned, as long as you would like. That's our program. We will be back at the same stations, the same places next week. We hope you will be too. Until then, cheers.
White House Chronicle is produced in collaboration with WHUT, Howard University Television. From Washington, D.C., this has been White House Chronicle, a weekly analysis of the news with insight and a sense of humor, featuring Llewellyn King, Linda Gasparello, and guests. This program may be seen on PBS stations and cable access channels. To view the program online, visit us at whitehousechronicle.com.